Coming up next, CityNet 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Today's program is featuring the much talked about, feared, and dreaded Y2K problem. Today we have Leille, Sussman, and Erich Merrill, experts on this subject, who will share their perspectives on the bug. But before getting to the program, we have a few announcements. The first is that next Friday's program, April 9th, please join us for Governor John Kitzhaber's announcement of his new tax and school funding plan. That's next Friday. It's going to be here at the Multnomah Athletic Club. Then following that, on Tuesday, April 13th, the City Club Issue Committee on Education and Human Development will host Dick Minard, who's director of the Center for Education Re-Education Change, and Jim Green, who's a legislative advocate for the Oregon School Boards Association, and the topic will be Alternative Visions for Charter Schools. Now that meeting will be at the City Club office at noon. Again, it's on Tuesday, April 13th. Should be an interesting one. Our series of legislative has begun, and there is still space available. So if you're interested in this and you missed out on the registration, it's not too late. You can still, if you're a member, purchase the remaining 3 breakfasts for just $42. And it's an opportunity to get the latest and direct information from the legislature on education, transportation, and revenue issues. If you're interested in signing up for the remaining 3 breakfasts, just call the City Club office and register with Winnie Kane. On to our program. Our board host, seated at the head table today, is Jay Formick. He's a member of the Board of Governors and Executive Director for Oregon Heat. He will ask the first question of our speakers today directly following their presentations. After Jay asks the first question, we will open the program to questions from other City Club members in the audience. Please approach the microphone even before Jay has completed his question so that we can maximize the use of time and the number of questions that can be asked. At that time, at the mic, introduce yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds, please. Finally, I'd like to announce that broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part because of generous corporate underwriting from the following: Washington Mutual Savings Bank, Miller, Nash, Wiener, Hager, and Carlsen, and Kaiser Permanente. We're grateful for their support. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker today will be Leille Sussman, who has a 20-year background in systems development and support, including successful management and implementation of enterprise-wide, multi-million-dollar, multi-corporation, international projects in a variety of business areas. She formed Sussman, Inc. specifically to assist organizations with year 2000 risk management programs. She describes herself as a year 2000 ambassador and is a well-known consultant, speaker, author, and volunteer. Ms. Sussman specializes in enterprise program management, oversight, risk assessment, quality assurance, and contingency planning. This past spring, she established L&S Resources, which is a partnership that produces year 2000 educational products for homes and businesses. And these products are very successful internationally. So we look forward to that. Our second speaker today is Erich Merrill, Jr. Mr. Merrill is a law partner at Miller, Nash, Wiener, Hager, and Carlsen, which is a firm that he joined in 1983. His focus is on corporate and securities law, intellectual property, and computer law. He earned his JD from Harvard Law School and a BE summa cum laude from Vanderbilt University, where he had a triple major in electrical engineering, computer science, and mathematics. Mr. Merrill advises clients on security matters, trademark and patenting issues, and he has substantial experience with copyright issues in the computer and entertainment industries. In addition to being a member of the Oregon State Bar, Mr. Merrill is also admitted to practice before the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. He served in several leadership roles, including his term on the executive committee of the Bar's computer law section. He's a published author and a committed volunteer within our community. Please welcome our two speakers who will enlighten us now about Y2K.
Hello, I'm going to change my bio next year. I'm coming back as a clown, so people smile when they see me. They all see me now and they go, Y2K, ooh. I've got a quick question for you. How many of you have completed your remediation, completed your contingency plans, changed your suppliers who are at risk, and are in maintenance mode? Put up your hands. Ooh, we have a couple of people. But this is the risk that we face. If everybody had their hands up, April 1, 99, I would feel a lot more secure about where we are. But we are not. We are not at this stage. And this is what we need to look at. What is Y2K? Basically, there's two issues. 99 plus 1 equals 0, 0. We all know that, right? And it's also a leap year issue. It's pretty obvious what the issues are there. But thinking about leap year, in 1996, in New Zealand, an aluminum smelter didn't recognize 96 as a leap year. On the 365th day, one day early, it shut down. The aluminum solidified throughout the whole system. 2 hours later, the exact same thing happened in Australia. And it took millions and weeks to clean that mess up. And it just shows some of the subtleties very quickly about year 2000. We have testing for 0, 0. We have testing for leap year. We also have the end of the year testing, 365, 366 days, etc. Why did it happen? I want to tell you, I'm a very old programmer. It was not the programmer's fault. There's a few programmers in here I know, but it was a management decision, and it was a tactical management decision. It made absolute economic sense. The PCs that you have sitting on your desk today is valued at about $73 million in 1970s terms. It made sense. So when are we having the problems? And this is really interesting. There's several dates. What we expect to see is a bell curve of problems. Social Security is done because they started working on this back in 1989, and they're finally done 9 years later. But they had problems then with 10-year forward aging. 10/1/98 was really the start of the risk dates. That was federal fiscal year 99. We didn't see too many problems with that. 1/1/99, we expected to see some problems, and we did. Nothing earth-shattering, nothing life-threatening, but we did see some problems. We were able to recover pretty quickly, but that had a couple of risks. One was the use of 99 and 1 year forward aging. Also the introduction of the electronic Eurodollar. We didn't see any problems there as we had anticipated. 4/1/99, April Fool's Day, yesterday, is fiscal year 2000 for New York State, Canada, Mexico, and Japan. Just some minor trading partners. So we're waiting to see what errors or what problems we have this month. And by the way, we don't know what is going to happen, but I use these dates to be able to model for myself how big our risks are. And I can tell you that we've been very fortunate so far, and I'm feeling more positive about the risks. But this is a way to measure what could possibly happen. Risk dates coming up, 7/1/99, 46 states, fiscal year 2000, including Oregon, I think. 10/1/99, federal fiscal year 2000. 9/9/99 is a bit of an issue, but more for shop floor systems, CNCs, process logic controllers. Not really the big issue. And then we get to 1/1/2000. The Gartner Group estimates that we'll probably have about 20% of the problems this year. They anticipate about 10% in the first 2 weeks of 2000, with potentially 5% in the year 2001. So it's not all going to happen at once. Another good news factor. So where are the problems? They're pretty obvious to all of us. They're in our PCs, our laptops, our mid-ranges, and our mainframes. They're in the software that runs on them. We've all heard about Microsoft products not being compliant yet. And they're in our business applications, maybe Quicken, for example, who came out in January with a compliant version. It's also in the embedded chip systems. On a personal level, they could be in our cell phones or in our laptops. But it gets big in a hurry. They are in our infrastructure, in the systems that deliver our food, our water, and our medical systems. Within our businesses, we have internal direct risks from technology, our PCs, our software, our facility systems, heating and ventilation, facilities, etc. But then we get into internal indirect risks, our potential personal liability, financial burden of year 2000 fixes, and employee confidence in what we're doing or have done. And then we have external direct risks. We need to look at the supply chain. Are we going to have risks with our customers or with our suppliers or our service providers? And then the external indirect risks, the economy. If we have some economic changes, what could that do to us and to our business and to our preparations? So from a 0-0, it gets pretty big in a very great hurry. What are the standards about Y2K? And this is one of the biggest issues that we face in terms of all of the coding that we have. There are something like 29 different date formats. And coming from New Zealand, I'm not sure whether I was born on 6/4 or 4/6. I keep getting confused, having been here for 20 years now. But the European date format is quite a lot different from the Americans. But 29 different date formats. ISO, the International Standards Organization, has spent over 9 years trying to create a date standard, and they have not come up with one yet. I think we're going to have one pretty soon. But what that means is that internally in our own systems, within our own organizations, we can control that. But when we interface, we have to look at those bridges and what that communication is. Again, one of our big risks. So, what's the current status? Internationally, they talk about Asia who are worried about economic survival, let alone fixing the year 2000 issue. I have friends in Hong Kong and Thailand, and it's not even on their radar scope. Europe is very busy with the euro dollar. There was a United Nations meeting in December of last year. 117 representatives came. A lot of concern. That's one of the three key risks that we face, is the international status. The federal report card is getting better. It's a C-, but as Governor Horn pointed out, the 6 bottom agencies rated C and F have over 50% of the mission critical systems. Still a lot of work to be done. There was a survey done of all of the counties and cities across the nation. 50% they estimate have started, and that was in December. The state of Oregon, I can tell you, is in pretty good shape. The budget, oh, by the way, the federal budget is just over $6 billion with an emergency fund of over $3 billion, our tax-paying dollars. State of Oregon, $100 million. State of Oregon is in really pretty good shape. I participated in some contingency planning workshops and in some quality assurance on some of the agencies, and we're doing a great job. The counties and cities, Portland and Multnomah. I'm a project manager, and we have the City of Portland project manager here. I think I'm one of the best, so I'm pretty cynical about other people. What are you doing? But I can tell you that Dick Hoffman, the City of Portland, and Multnomah County are doing a fabulous job. Very impressed with what they're doing. And certainly take my hat off to Mayor Katz and her proposal to go out and educate and use Y2K. So doing an excellent job there. The 3 key risks that we face, the international risk, the public sector, and then small business. Small businesses are a concern. There's 96,000 small businesses here in Oregon and southern Washington. The NFIB predicts that 7%, some 7% will go out of business, and that's a concern. Looking at our infrastructure, finance. In my mind, they're the leaders in Y2K, heavily regulated, heavily mandated. I've been working with the largest credit unions in the state, done quality assurance on some of the ones in Washington. Governor Kelly, in my mind, is he's a hero. The fact is that they are creating 1/3 more cash. They have stopped burning money. These are all things that give us all confidence. The medical area, I think they're late, but the good news is they're very well versed in contingency planning. Transportation, minimal information on that. Power, increasing confidence. At our Year 2000 user group, we had BPA, PGE, Northwest Natural. Much better news coming out from all of those departments. We are going to have some nationwide drills, one starting next week in April and another one in September. So again, keeping an eye on these kinds of activities will give us information about where we are. Telecommunications, same thing. AT&T did a private conference out here with about 20 companies, sounding pretty good. US West, the same. Water, there appears to be a little risk with water, but that relationship is the power and water. So as power goes, so goes water, supposedly. Fuels are our least well known. More than 50% of our fuel comes from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. And according to the international status is they are 18 months behind us. What that means, I don't know, but that is a risk. So what do I do? It's Risk Management 101. The first thing is basically be educated about the full scope of the risks. I am still seeing businesses saying, my PCs are fine and they're Pentium, so I must be okay. And it's much greater than that. You have to look at your whole business, your internal and external relationships, and how you sit in the environment. So do a risk assessment. Then you have to have a strategy. You can't fix everything. What is your strategy? And then 2 plans, a contingency plan and a remediation plan. Do your development. Do your validation and certification. For due diligence, you cannot accept anybody else's work. If it's mission critical to you, you need to test it and verify it. And then get into maintenance mode. Be responsive and look for exceptions and changes and anticipate unusual events this year and probably next. Look at the time, money, and tools that you have, and particularly look at your skills: project management, methods and processes, quality assurance, and documentation. It's been a big issue for a lot of organizations, big and small. Critical success factors: have a plan. Buy one, develop one, adapt one. Get a plan. Program management, critical to your success. Validation and certification. You've got to certify that your mission critical processes will work. And communications. Education. Identify all the stakeholders who are interested in your status. The utility companies are pretty aware of this, pretty much in demand. City is. A lot of people are, but you need a communications strategy. And I just want to get on my soapbox about this. Every single employee, every single one of us needs to know about this, both personally and professionally. The good news will be if our systems break, we'll see they're broken. But what's more likely to happen is we're going to have data errors. And it's the individual employee who will be your best chance of finding those issues and resolving them pretty quickly. Due diligence. And Erich will speak to that. Am I running out of time? 2 more minutes. I want to talk to you about a partnership that we have just formed an Oregon Y2K statewide task force. It actually came from a federal initiative. The Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, and U.S. Department of Agriculture looked at all the work that they were doing for Y2K, and they have formed teams in every state. The SBA, the SBDC, the U.S. Department of Agriculture extension agents who run through Oregon State University, and the MEPs, Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, are in each state. And we have formed one here in Oregon. We're going out with a statewide initiative with information to every Chamber of Commerce and every library and trying to get out to everybody. There are tools out there. We're doing this outreach to manufacturers, small business, and particularly agriculture and farm related organizations. So lots of tools out there, lots of information. I'll turn it over to Erich, who'll tell you exactly why you need to take care of this.
I hope that based on Leille's comments, you've come to the conclusion, if you weren't already there, that the Y2K problem is so widespread that any type of business is going to be affected to some extent. In other words, we're not just talking about businesses that sell software or that sell hardware that may have some embedded chip in it. It's any kind of business, even one selling, say, something like produce. So what is the problem that makes people willing to come to a meeting like this one today, other than, of course, having a good lunch and it being on the schedule? The problem is Y2K litigation, and I want to talk a little bit about that problem before I get into how you can inoculate your business against the Y2K bug from a legal perspective. We've got a little bit of information about what is likely to happen in the year 2000 based on what's happened so far. If I had given this talk about, well, actually when it was originally scheduled, which was at the end of January, I would have told you that we had about 40 cases filed nationwide relating to something having to do with Y2K problems. Just this week, the Gartner Group came out with a new count, and it's now up to 80 cases filed. The thing that was particularly interesting to me was, and I don't know where they got this information, the statement that there are 800 cases in a pre-filing stage. In other words, something about to hit the courts, but that hasn't yet. So you can really see the curve is headed this way, and we haven't even gotten to the year 2000 yet. The cases that have been brought so far have generally focused on software companies or people who have sold some sort of product that is year 2000 sensitive. The results have been mixed. A lot of them, frankly, have settled. Some of them have been dismissed. And the ones that have been dismissed have generally been dismissed because they were brought too early. Somebody was suing, alleging some sort of year 2000 injury, and the court simply couldn't find an injury there to compensate anybody for. So those have generally fallen away. There have been, however, some that have resulted in awards. One involving some medical software resulted in a $1.5 million award against the manufacturer for not having a Y2K compliant product. So we are going to start to see some real money awarded against businesses who don't take care of Y2K problems. I want to move now to what might happen in the year 2000. We're going to see, I should have said this, the cases that have been filed so far have been, for the most part, class actions, where we have multiple plaintiffs filing an action against one defendant. I think that's going to continue as we move toward the year 2000, but I also think we're going to see a lot more cases brought against individual businesses, where a customer is upset with one thing that happened, one contract with one business, and they're going to sue based on that. So the focus is going to change, I think, from largely class action to lots and lots of little cases. The defendants, instead of being software companies, are going to be probably all businesses, because we're going to see lawsuits not just by people who have bought software. We're going to see lawsuits by people who were promised a load of produce and it didn't arrive on Friday. Instead, it got here on Wednesday because transportation was delayed, that sort of thing. The costs of litigation could very well exceed all of the recoveries that will be involved, and they will almost definitely exceed the costs of fixing the problem. The number here is huge, and it's been interesting to me that over the past 2 years, which is the time I've kind of been looking into this, it's been pretty consistent. The estimates 2 years ago were that there's about $1 trillion worth of legal costs that are likely to come out of Y2K, and that's still the estimate you see today. Lloyd's of London most recently said something about what they thought legal costs in the U.S. would be, and that was their number. A last comment on this topic about who will sue, because you need to know that if you're going to protect against it. I think the most likely plaintiff is going to be your customer. That's who you're going to see suing businesses pretty much across the board. Now, if you're involved with a publicly held company, there could very well be lawsuits about shareholders. I'm going to not focus comments on that topic unless we get into that in the questions. Be happy to talk about that later if there is interest. Given this liability risk, I want to talk a little bit about how you avoid liability. And there are basically 4 things you can do. You can solve the problem, you can be careful what you promise, you can tell the truth, and if appropriate, you can set up a Y2K website. Can we talk about each of those? Solving the problem really is what Leille was talking about. You definitely need to have a plan in place, and you need to follow through on it. Leille referred to due diligence. One thing you need to do when you have a plan is carefully document the steps that you take. Don't have a plan and then tell people to go out and do it, and then have the rest of it just be, oral reports back that yes, we did it, that's fine, here's where we are. You need to have a paper trail. The reason is most plans are going to have some area in which they don't work. There's going to be something that doesn't go as planned, and the year 2000 is going to come by, and there will be some glitch. It may not be a huge one, it might be something. If you get sued for one of those, you want to be able to turn to the judge and say, here's our plan, and here are the steps we took to implement it. Yeah, we missed this thing, but given where we were at the time, that was a reasonable thing for us to do. And I think if you establish that, in most cases, the judge is going to say, you're right, there shouldn't be any liability here. So documentation is very important. Staffing the plan appropriately is also very important. It does no good to have a plan for legal purposes. If somebody's suing, you can say, well, that's great, you had a plan, but you didn't give anybody the time to implement it. I do want to say one thing about solving the problem. In addition to that, I handed out a sheet to those of you who are here in the room before the presentation started. If you look on the back, you will see a sample response letter to a customer inquiry, and in the middle of that is a quote from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has been looking at this for quite some time. I won't read you the whole thing, but it basically says, it is not possible for any business to certify that they are year 2000 compliant. The reason is the problem is just too big. Now that's the SEC, and if the SEC is taking that position, and they have looked at this pretty carefully for a number of years, you should think hard before you ever promise anybody who's a customer of yours that your business is year 2000 compliant. That's why, again, a plan is going to be really, really important. If you can't guarantee compliance, you can at least have a plan that backs up that you were taking reasonable steps to get there. Solving the problem was step one. Step two is to be careful what you promise. And by this I mean, look at the contracts that your business uses. Almost every business, even those that sell, say, on purchase orders, have some sort of boilerplate terms that control their sales. You want to look at those and see if they include some things. One of the first things I would make sure you've got in your contract is a disclaimer of implied warranties. This really doesn't relate too much to the Y2K problem, or it's not unique to it. And most businesses will have that kind of a disclaimer in there. But if you don't have that, you definitely want to put it in before 1/1/2000, because that's one basis actually on which courts have dismissed some of the suits that have been brought. They've said the vendor disclaimed any implied warranties, so there was no warranty here talking about year 2000, and so there's no case. So it can be an important defense. Another contract provision that you might consider is something dealing with delay. Delays are kind of likely to happen as a result of Y2K problems. Many of you by now have heard about Microsoft's release of Windows 2000. It's been delayed a little bit. The current release date, I believe, is first quarter of 1901. So put a delay provision in your contract that says, if performance is delayed for some reason, the customer can do this. Maybe this is cancel the contract, maybe this is reschedule the order, but this is not collect damages. Another contract provision to look at is the force majeure clause. A force majeure clause is the one that says our performance is excused if there's a hurricane or the federal government passes a new regulation or something like that. You might consider specifically including the Y2K problem in that clause so that Y2K problems, at least those caused by your vendors, those outside your business, would be covered by that clause. That kind of clause probably can't cover in-house problems. A court wouldn't allow you to say, we just aren't going to have any liability at all for doing nothing about Y2K. You probably have to do something. If you're involved in a business that sells a product particularly aimed at solving Y2K problems, maybe you're a Y2K consultant, maybe you sell software that is going to help people figure out Or maybe you sell software patches for programs. There's a specific provision in an act that was passed last October that you need to know about. The act is the Year 2000 Information and Readiness Disclosure Act, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We probably will get to that mostly in the questions. But it has in it a section that deals with a contract term you need to put in if you're one of these vendors. It's the first one on the sheet I handed out. It basically says, statements made to you in the course of this sale are subject to the Year 2000 Information and Readiness Disclosure Act. In case of a dispute, this act may reduce your legal rights. It goes on a little bit. The reason that's important is that the act is pretty helpful in saying that statements made about Y2K compliance or made in the course of a sale generally won't be considered warranties unless they're reduced to writing and put in the contract. It's not true in the case of a remediation product or service unless you put this language in. So if you're in that category, pay attention to this language and put it in your contracts. I want to talk quickly about warranties. In most cases where you are selling some kind of date-sensitive product, your customer is going to request a warranty about Year 2000 compliance. Also, if you're providing services that are particularly important, your customer may want some kind of warranty. In the materials handed out, there are two different sample warranties that you may want to compare. One is what a buyer might request, and it pretty much just says that the seller's performance won't be affected by Year 2000 problems. At first, that sounds okay if you're willing to make that warranty and you feel pretty comfortable. But realize that that goes far beyond just your business. If the power goes out, if the phones go out, if your suppliers aren't performing, or maybe they are performing, but since they're in a business now that has shortages because of Y2K problems, maybe their price to you goes up. You know, all of those things can come together to somehow affect your performance under the contract. What you can do instead is warrant that you have taken reasonable steps. And again, this goes back to the plan idea to avoid Year 2000 problems, not that there won't be any. In the second version of the warranty I put in as a sample, there's even a statement that the buyer acknowledges that this is such a widespread problem that you really can't make an absolute guarantee. So these are kind of the two ends of the spectrum on which you might see in warranties in an agreement. The next thing that I think you should do to avoid Year 2000 liability is tell the truth. If you get questions from customers, be sure to respond to those fully and completely. Don't hide things. Don't say, yeah, we're doing great, when in fact you know that there are some problems that haven't been addressed yet. Say they haven't been addressed and we plan to do it by this time, or we don't plan to do it. But you can really get into trouble by not responding or responding incorrectly. How are we doing here? Okay. There's a Y2K Act trap that I want to talk about, having to do with telling the truth. In general, the Y2K Act was meant to encourage the flow of information by saying you won't be liable for telling people what you're doing to solve the Y2K problem. But there's one area in which, for reasons I don't understand entirely, the Act really does lay a trap, and that is if you pass along statements made by somebody else, say your suppliers, and those statements turn out to be wrong, you can be held liable for that even if it was reasonable for you to pass those statements along. And it's a very different tone from the rest of the Act. The trick is that whenever you pass along a statement from a vendor or from a third party, and you want your customer to see that, you need to say at the same time in writing that this is not, we are not the source of this statement. It came from company X, and we have not independently verified it. Because of the way the Act is drafted, and to be honest, I think this is a mistake, if you don't say those things in writing at the time you pass along this information, you have assumed liability, or absolute liability, if that information is wrong. And that's just completely different from the rest of the way the Act works, or the way the rest of the Act works, which is to say that you're not liable as long as there's a reasonable basis for what you're doing. So avoid that trap. Finally, set up a Y2K website. There is a provision in the Y2K Act saying that you can give notice to customers, particularly those that you really don't know how to reach, by setting up a website that identifies itself as a year 2000 website, and you put on there what information you think is pertinent for your customers to have about year 2000 compliance. This would be particularly useful for a business that had sold products over a number of years, some of which are clearly not year 2000 compliant. It's a good way to notify customers, if you don't know exactly who they are, that there might be a problem and they'll need to make an upgrade or come see you about it. The website doesn't help if you're selling a product on a basis that would allow you very easily to make written direct notice to people. So it won't get around having to do that kind of, having to give that kind of notice, but it can help in sort of the mass marketing situation. I'm going to talk for just a minute about some pending legislation, and then I think we'll start the questions. There is one bill that has gone through Congress and is before President Clinton right now that would allow the SBA to make loans specifically for costs related to Y2K problems. So for some businesses that may be helpful, assuming it gets signed. There are a number of bills that have been proposed to limit liability for Y2K problems or to discourage Y2K lawsuits. And I have kind of mixed feelings about that, because to be honest, I think a lot of the action that is being taken right now to fix the Y2K problem is because people realize there could be liability if they don't take that action. I think another concern, probably a bigger one, is they want their businesses to stay around. But it's kind of hard to predict what would happen if you could completely eliminate liability for Y2K problems. I think for those reasons, or for that reason, and also because there are huge lobby interests around that bill, that one's probably not going to pass. But who knows? I think I'll close with that, and we'll start with the questions.
Well, thank you, Leille Sussman and Erich Merrill, Jr. I feel somewhat relieved, I think. I suppose if Franklin Delano Roosevelt were with us, he would say the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, or perhaps he might say the only thing we have to fear are the lawyers. My question is predicated on that, actually. If the only thing we really have to fear are the lawyers, 1 trillion with a T is a lot of money. If the only thing we have to fear really are the lawyers, how deep into the next millennium will Y2K problems cut? And Leille and Erich, you can answer this in tandem or in whatever method you choose. I'm just wondering, are we going to be dealing with this until 2010, 2025? And if my premise that the only thing we have to fear are the lawyers is wrong, would you please disabuse me of that?
I think I'd like to answer that. Some of my friends have said, well, I'm going to be out of a job in December. And I said, yes, please. But I'm actually predicting that I'm going to be working until about 2003 or 2004. There's going to be a lot of cleanup work. What everyone's focusing on is mission-critical systems. Well, what about all those systems that aren't mission-critical but have some value somewhere? So, yes, there's going to be work for quite a lot of time to come. How many years? I don't really know. I'd like to address the fear factor. I think that there's two concerns that we have. On the business side, I think it's denial of the scope of the problem and taking care of it. And on the personal side, it is fear. And the answer to fear is education and action. That's why I really applaud Mayor Katz's plan to go out and educate. By education, you can see the realities of the problem. By action and preparation, we have psychological and physical ownership of it. And if we all prepare, both personally, professionally, and in our communities, if we have problems, we'll be able to recover that much more quickly. And I think the fear factor is the biggest issue that we have to face. We can fix things. We are amazingly, we're incredible. We can respond. We can fix things. What we can't do is respond to some of the actions that fear can take, such as everybody abandoning the stock market or everybody taking out a lot of cash. Those things can have a much greater impact than our Y2K issues can. So, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to throw that in there.
Can I respond a little bit, Jay? I think on the legal side, and I have to say I'm a business lawyer, so there are a lot of things I don't know about litigation. But there are statutes of limitations on a lot of actions, and once we pass January 1, 2000, there will be a limit on how long people can wait to bring lawsuits. I agree with Leille generally. I think by about 2003, 2004, most of it will have shaken out. Probably some of the litigation will still be going on, but I think we will have seen most of it by that time.
Bill Savage, City Club member. Leo, could you say something about what steps we should take on in terms of making sure our personal PCs are compliant?
The first thing is don't do it manually. I've seen some letters from some of the banks and things like that. Use a tool. You can download tools free from the website. There's just do a search. There's quite a few of them out there. And in fact, in the packets, there's some SBA packets back there with some diskettes with some tools on them. Or go to Home Depot or Office Depot. Or I'm a bit of a computer geek, and I didn't even want to test my own PC. The SBA have a half-day class every Friday, and they actually will walk you through this. They'll actually show you a motherboard, etc., and show you how to check out your home PC. Definitely check them out. Pentium 100s can have this problem. If you've got 5 or 6 or 7 PCs, test them all. They all, the embedded chips, you've got to test them all. You can't just say one model is if you've tested one, it's okay. Thanks.
Let me add to that. I just used the SBA program that Leille is talking about that's in your packets last night on my 2 computers. One is a Pentium, it's a 133, it's about 2 years old, a 3. And the other is a much older computer. It's a 386 from probably about 92 or 93. And interestingly, both of them had exactly the same result. Both of them flashed that they would not roll over correctly. Instead of going to 1/1/2000, they would go to 1/1/1900. But they also came up with the test result that if I set the computer ahead on January 1, 2000 to the right date, that everything would probably be fine. Now, that's with the hardware, that's not the software test. But I think, take these packets home, you'll find it interesting.
Yeah, excuse me. Ray Prasad, I'm a relatively new member for about a month, but I think I do qualify to asking questions, so I'll go ahead and do that. Well, I think my question is very much somewhat related to the previous question. You kind of addressed things that had to do with the businesses. And as you know, there are a lot of books out about how you go ahead and store food and this and that. So do you have some advice for people not to do with the business but at home?
I do believe that we all need to be prepared. To what level, for how long? I respect every single opinion. I don't go to the worst case, but those people that are preparing for a year, if that's what gives people peace of mind, do it. If that's what takes the fear away, do it. Personal preparedness. I don't have any specifics, but there are 2 excellent resources. The Red Cross has a very good handout about preparedness, and so does FEMA. 2 websites, or call your local Red Cross. There's also a lot more books, and it's interesting. We talk to businesses, and we don't get quite the turnout that food preparation groups do. They get thousands, and we get hundreds. I'm kind of envious. We still need to fix things, not prepare, but those are 2 good resources, and certainly a lot of books in the bookstores. So,
Nolan Tanner, City Club member. Can you give us an idea of what proportion of the hardwired controller chips out there, our BIOS chips, are date sensitive, and where are they located, and where does the statute of limitations fit in on old controller chips?
You want to talk about the percentage, and I'll talk about
I can't give you all the facts, but I do know from the embedded chip side, not from PCs or the BIOS side, but that's more a function of age. What I'm hearing is PCs, anything older than about 2 years, there are most likely problems. But you certainly have to check the current ones. The embedded chip side of that, a year ago, we didn't really have a good handle on what proportion. There were any range of numbers from 10% down. What we've found, current as of now, is less than 1/2 of 1%. But 1/2 of 1% of 70 billion chips is still a pretty big number. And one example, by the way, a local example, Pacificor. Anyone from Pacificor in here? I use that in some of my presentations because they have more than 10% of their embedded chips have a problem. So just shows the span from anywhere from 0 to a pretty high percentage.
On the statute of limitations question, again, this is coming from a business lawyer. Statute.
Talking like a true lawyer, right?
Disclaimer, yes. In general, statute of limitations will not start to run unless you have discovered the problem or should have discovered the problem. So if you're talking about an embedded chip that has a date failure in it that doesn't occur until 1/1/2000, you very well might be able to say, well, the statute of limitations doesn't even start to run until that failure occurs and you find that there's a problem. On the other hand, there certainly has been a lot of publicity about the year 2000 problem and the fact that it affects embedded chips. And so if you consciously decided, or maybe unconsciously decided, not to inspect your embedded chips and try to figure out whether there was a problem, you might run into a situation where the statute would have run whenever the court decides you really should have tested and taken steps to find out what was in there.
I'd like to just add a little example to that. The gas pipeline from Alaska to California, every few miles there's a pumping, there's pumping areas. There are embedded chips in there, and they do not know whether those are going to work or not. So they're going to hire people, and, well, Happy New Year, everyone. They're going to be out there on site, ready to respond if there are problems. So that's an example. Again, this is contingency planning, this is preparedness. All of this gives me confidence. They don't know, but they're there ready to recover if things happen.
This is maybe going beyond the original question, but it is kind of a planning issue. This can be an excellent example of why you should be in touch with your suppliers and vendors, asking them about the year 2000 status of the products they have supplied to you. Because if you do that and you get an answer back from them saying, no, there's no problem, and then it turns out there is one in year 2000, I think you've pretty well preserved your statute of limitations and kept it from starting to run.
I'm Don Sterling, a member. Mr. Merrill, if all these companies are spending all these jillions getting ready, do they have a cause of action against the manufacturers of hardware and software for putting them through all this trouble?
In some cases they do, and in some they don't. The courts have said so far, and it's hard to generalize based on what we've seen so far because there haven't been a lot of major problems. But the courts have thrown out a number of cases in which software, I'm not aware of hardware, I think it's just software, didn't work. And now it's known that there is a problem, that it's not going to work after the year 2000. There have been a number of cases, for example, brought against Intuit because some of the products that it distributed were not year 2000 compliant. Those have been dismissed because the court said basically that there was no contractual term that promised year 2000 compliance, and there were disclaimers involved. They've dismissed them for other reasons too, but that's been one basis. So in some cases, if there is a contract in place that limits the cause of action, you will not be able to sue the manufacturer, at least based on the contract. You may be able to find a way around that. For example, if the salesperson who brought you this product said something like, this will be software that you won't outgrow for the next 50 years, you might be able to use that to find a reason or a basis for a lawsuit. On the other hand, a court threw out exactly that case within the last, I think, couple of months, because again, there was nothing in the contract that guaranteed year 2000 compliance.
John Leeper, City Club member. Mr. Merrill, if I understood you right, you said on or about 1 January 2000, this disclaimer should be put in anything you have in the way of documentation going out to better satisfy your liabilities. As just an uninformed citizen, it would look to me like, in that many contracts are on a multi-year basis, this possibly should have been started 2 years ago or no later than next Monday morning.
Oh, yeah.
Is that an appropriate thought on my part?
Absolutely. If I said you should wait till year 2000 to put these things in, that definitely was not my intent. All of the comments I made about contract provisions are things you should be doing right now because you're going to incur liability not beginning 1/1/2000. It's what's going on right now. So thank you for bringing that up. That definitely is a clarification that needs to be made.
I wonder if you, Leille, specifically, and maybe both of you could amplify a little bit on the potential for the international situation, maybe worst case, best case, and how it may, or let's say most probably, affect our economy.
Whew. Let me see. I can go and buy some stock and become a multimillionaire if I could answer that one. A couple of comments. I come from New Zealand. New Zealand's in really bad shape. Those criminals in Australia are much further ahead. I don't know. You know, it's kind of like the yay boo. First of all, we're so much more dependent on technology here, so our risks are much greater. And if you look globally, the risks are not as high in some other places. I'm pretty concerned about the international risk. There is a lot of concern. The Department of Defense, I think it was about August last year, initiated a communication strategy with all of the countries about defense systems. And Russia came back and said, we'll fix things when they break. So there's been a lot of progress since then, and awareness has really changed since December of last year. It's amazing to me, this is April of '99, and we're still talking awareness in some places. However, the risks are very real. My own estimation is we're going to have a depression of some kind, a recession of some kind. But, you know, the variables, there's just way too many to really come up with a prediction on what could happen. There is a federal initiative, I believe it's going to be announced next Tuesday, where they are looking for volunteers, year 2000 volunteers to go and help internationally. What that's going to look like, we'll hear next Tuesday. But it's a very great concern to everyone. I wish I could tell you what. I've invested in year 2000 stocks. I've lost money on them. No.
Dan Goldie, everybody knows that the high-tech industries are now the single largest industrial employer in the state of Oregon. My question is, how big a backlog does the industry have to meet this problem on the year at the end of this year, and how much of a backlog or a lack of backlog will they have after 2000 arrives? Are we going to see a major change in demand in the industry that would affect the economy?
You know, I think that's really interesting. Again, that's why I said I've invested some money and it just hasn't happened. But that's what I think is going to be one of the issues and really very unusual events. Just in time, we all live just in time. It's not just manufacturing companies. We personally live just in time. We go to the grocery store every 2 days and we carry plastic, etc. I think that the supply chain is going to be an issue, and I think there's going to be some real issues there. That's why prepare now, get it done. I wish everyone was done because supply and demand can adjust as necessary. I was on a panel yesterday with a person from Agreco, which they have these big truck trailers of backup power sources, and they're in fact the largest organization in the world that does this. And they have already rented out 90% of the capacity that they're going to through the end of the year. And they get people calling saying, we'd like to reserve it for December. And they said, no, not possible. So I think that we're going to see some real issues there. Not just in technology. For example, medicines. There's a big demand on medicines, and there's a big controversy there about people who have a limited supply, and Medicare and Medicaid have these limitations of how much you can get. There's been some rumors that the federal government might change that. But there's also been a lot of discussion about the pharmaceutical chains, how it takes a lot to ramp up to increase the supply. And these are not trivial issues. So I have a friend who went to Costco, and you can't buy a generator for love nor money anymore. I took to my local Thriftway organization. They've been having Y2K caseload of goods sales. They're already preparing for things like that. So, very generic answer.
Actually, you can buy generators, but you have to buy a dozen.
Martha Radakovich, City Club member. I'm interested to know what is expected of the travel business, and should we all stay home the first 6 months of next year? Or, are there countries that are more vulnerable to the downing of the computer system? And what about hospitals? in foreign countries. How is that service going to be limited? For those of us who like to go, and some people, of course, travel for business. So it's a widespread concern, I think, at this time.
Travel, I think, is an interesting issue. Where do you want to be on New Year's Eve? I know I'm going to be with my family, wherever that is. The FAA, I understand, has said that they have no concerns with the airlines here in the United States, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong or add to this. I'm thinking Dick Hoffman particularly. But they have said that if there are any concerns with any international flights, that they will prohibit those. My question is, will the insurance companies let the flights occur? They have talked, we kind of laugh, again, you pull a little thread and it gets very complicated in a hurry. They have said that they will have a lot less flights, and then they've said if they grounded all the aircraft, there's not enough parking space for all of them because there's so much in the air at one time. So, how far do you take contingency planning? I have heard that for the 3 days, the end of December and into January, they are apparently doubling the flight time requirements between flights, and so they're anticipating a 50% slowdown, and that's for the 3 days, I believe.
Leille, I had heard some pilots were saying they were not going to fly those days, even if the FAA had no problems, because they were concerned about chips within the planes, perhaps unexpectedly shutting down a system, and I just wondered if you have any information about that.
Actually, I saw a very interesting article on the web from, I'm not sure exactly what union it was. It's very interesting to me that the unions have not gotten a hold of this, but I believe it's the, no, I'm not sure, but one of the unions related to flight, very concerned about where the FAA is, and are really saying that the report's wrong and invalid. So again, so many variables, so many factors in this.
I want to thank our two speakers, Leille Sussman and Erich Merrill. This has really been a thought-provoking and interesting session today. I hope that we can all walk out of here feeling a little more prepared. I don't know how many of you are going to walk out of here feeling more scared than when you came in, but perhaps we can walk out being a little more prepared. Thank you both for an interesting program, and we are adjourned.